All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really trying to cut through the noise, get a handle on the complex reality unfolding in Ukraine.
Yeah, we're diving deep into, well, recent news, obviously, but also this major new assessment. It really lays bare the cost of the conflict over nearly 3 years.
And the just monumental task ahead.
Exactly. We've pulled together quite a bit for this deep dive recent BBC News reports, some specific context from CSIS.
Right.
And really, the core data is from the World Bank's fourth Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, RDNA4, they call it.
Okay, so our mission today is to kind of connect the dots for you. We want to take the pulse of the current political climate, what the news is reporting, and then zoom out to really grasp the staggering human, economic, physical toll that's documented in this big World Bank report.
It's about seeing the essential realities, beyond the headlines and understanding what recovery even looks like in this situation.
Okay, let's start with that immediate picture then, because the news, it's been dominated recently by these intense aerial attacks.
Right. The BBC specifically highlighted a record drone attack just over the weekend. These things, they trigger real reactions, immediate responses.
They really do. And we saw some pretty significant political comments captured in the reporting.
Yeah, like former President Trump, he was quoted calling Vladimir Putin absolutely crazy after these recent strikes. Even said something like, something has happened to him.
Which is, well, quite a statement. But interestingly, almost in the same breath, he also criticized President Zelensky.
Yeah, saying Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. So, a complex reaction there.
Definitely layered.
And then on the other side, you had the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. He described it as a very important moment, which is connected to an emotional overload of everyone involved.
An emotional overload.
And he also, maybe surprisingly, expressed some gratitude towards the U.S. for efforts related to negotiations.
Meanwhile, President Zelensky's reaction after those drone attacks was, well, quite different. He accused Russia of just trying to buy time.
Yeah. And calling for more sanctions, more real pressure on Moscow, a very clear stance.
And we also saw a notable comment, maybe a shift, from German politician Merz.
Right. He stated that Ukraine can now defend itself by hitting military positions inside Russia. Mentioned it's something they hadn't done much until recently.
And he drew a contrast there, didn't he?
Sharp one. Accusing Russia of ruthlessly attacking civilian targets, unlike Ukraine. And pretty significantly, he said Germany will remove range restrictions on weapons they supply.
Wow.
Specifically so Ukraine can attack military targets inside Russia.
So you really see this web of political statements all happening against the backdrop of these ongoing attacks.
Exactly. And speaking of the attacks, that CSIS context adds a really crucial detail.
What was that?
As of early 2025, a striking 80% of the critical electronics found in the Russian drones they examined were of Chinese origin.
80%. That really points to the supply chains involved, doesn't it? Yeah.
It absolutely does. And the immediate human impact of these specific attacks, it's stark. Reports mention Ukrainian firefighters battling blazes near Kharkiv.
Right.
And you saw reactions like Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, condemning the attacks on social media, called them indiscriminate killing of women and children.
Strong words.
Yeah, a clear violation of the 1977 Geneva Peace Protocols, called them shameful, urged a ceasefire.
So, okay, that's kind of the snapshot, the immediate news cycle of political commentary swirling around.
Right, but to really get the full picture, you have to look at the cumulative toll. And that's where this World Bank RDNA4 report is just essential.
It gives that deep, consistent assessment covering what from the start of the full-scale invasion.
February 24, 2022, yeah. All the way through December 31st, 2024, nearly 3 years of impact consolidated.
It puts numbers behind the headlines, really.
Exactly, and the human cost, it's just immense.
The report estimates, over 12,000 people killed since February 2022 and over 28,000 injured by the end of 2024.
And they're very clear. Those are likely underestimates. The actual figures are probably much higher.
And beyond the direct casualties, displacement is just staggering.
Over 13.5 million people forced from their homes between Feb 22 and December 24.
13.5 million.
Yeah. And by the end of last year, you had nearly 4.65 million registered as displaced inside Ukraine.
IDP is right.
Right, internally displaced persons. And an estimated 6.2 million recorded as refugees across Europe. Millions have just lost their homes entirely.
The economic picture is just as bleak, isn't it?
Devastating. Poverty rates just skyrocketed, almost doubled between 2021 and 2023.
Double. What were the figures?
Jumped from about 20.6% to 35.5%. Think about what that means on the ground.
That's huge. Nearly twice as many people living below the poverty line.
Millions more families struggling every day. And as of early 2025, they estimate 5 million people are food insecure.
5 million. And jobs, income.
Massive issue. Still ongoing. About a fifth of adults who had jobs before Feb 22 reported losing them. Over half reported losing income. The workforce overall shrunk by over 10%.
To the whole economy.
Took a massive hit. Ukraine's GDP in 2024 was estimated at only 78% of its 2021 level in real terms.
Wow. Shrunk by almost a quarter since the invasion started.
And looking ahead, the external financing needs are enormous.
Yep.
U.S. $39.3 billion needed just for 2025. And that doesn't even include debt operations.
$39 billion. And the deficit.
Expected to stay incredibly high. Well above 20% in 2025 and above pre-war levels for the medium term. It's a country under immense financial strain.
And the RDNA4 is clear. This burden, it doesn't fall equally on everyone.
No, absolutely not. It highlights the disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups. That's really crucial to understand.
Like women, for example.
Yes. There's the documented horror of increased gender-based violence, conflict-related sexual violence, but also economically, women-only households face severe challenges.
How severe?
The report says 35% are below the subsistence level. Compare that to 19% for men-only households.
Big difference.
Yeah. And older women, often living alone, displaced older women reporting feeling depressed. Women with disabilities less likely to get benefits, lower employment rates.
And the number of people with disabilities has actually increased because of the conflict, right? Trauma, injuries.
Significantly. And they face higher living costs, struggle with income, employment. Only about 17% are officially employed.
Accessing healthcare must be tough.
A huge challenge. Nearly half in collective sites report financial strain just getting care. And basic accessibility, less than 10% of bomb shelters are inclusive, for example. It's barrier after barrier.
And older people generally
disproportionately face poverty, housing issues, security risks. They're also less likely to evacuate dangerous areas.
What about the IDPs, the internally displaced?
They're facing huge challenges, too. Cash assistance programs are tightening. The number of beneficiaries was cut drastically from 2.5 million down to 1.2 million by mid-2024.
So they face risks returning or staying.
Both. Risks if they return to unsafe areas, risk of eviction where they are, or just unable to cover basic needs. Getting access to property or alternative housing is absolutely key for them to even think about returning.
And then there are the veterans.
Pressing needs there. Material assistance, housing nearly 40% need future housing help. Employment, retraining 30% can't find a job.
And the families of those missing or killed in action.
Often left struggling. Lack clear information about searches, benefits, financial or legal aid. It's heartbreaking.
So the human and economic picture from RDNA4, it's just profound, widespread devastation.
Across the entire country, yeah.
Okay, now let's shift to the physical destruction itself. The scale of the damage, the cost of recovery. It's almost hard to comprehend. RDNA4 gives us the numbers here.
Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around the scale. Total estimated physical damage across Ukraine as of the end of 2024. U.S. $176.1 billion.
$176 billion,
Right.
Just in physical damage. But the needs for recovery, reconstruction over the next 10 years, that's much higher, isn't it?
Far higher. U.S. $532.22 billion.
$500 billion. Wow.
It's a colossal figure, and you can see how it's grown compared to the earlier assessments, RDNA 1, 2, 3. The needs are so much higher than just the damage cost.
Why is that?
Well, it reflects things like inflation, obviously, but also lost economic opportunity, and crucially, the goal to build back better.
Meaning not just replacing what was lost, but improving it, making it more resilient.
Well, exactly. Building for the future.
Okay, so breaking it down by sector, where is the impact deepest? Housing must be huge.
Massive. Damage estimated at U.S. $57.6 billion. Needs. U.S. $83.7 billion.
$83 billion just for housing.
And the report highlights 13% of the entire country's housing stock was damaged or destroyed. That affects over 2.5 million households.
2.5 million families.
Yeah. They're using tools like their Registry of Damaged and Destroyed Property to track it, but just imagine the visual. Millions whose homes are gone or severely damaged.
And transport infrastructure. Roads, rail.
Took a huge hit, too.
Yeah.
U.S. $36.7 billion in damage. Needs are U.S. $77.5 billion.
So that means disruption everywhere.
Everywhere. Roads, bridges, railways, seaports, airports, all damaged. And you even see secondary impacts like workforce shortages in transport due to conscription,
Right.
leading to efforts to bring more women into roles like public transport drivers or truck drivers.
Energy infrastructure must be another critical area.
Absolutely critical. U.S. $20.5 billion in damage, but needs are estimated at U.S. $67.8 billion.
$67 billion.
The extensive attacks on energy facilities, they don't just cause direct damage, they have these huge ripple effects across every other sector, daily life, everything.
Okay, this next one seems different. Explosive hazards management. The damage is listed as 0.
Technically, yes, 0 direct damage to, say, demining equipment infrastructure itself, but the report estimates U.S. $29.8 billion in losses.
Losses, meaning economic impact.
Exactly. Lost productivity, inability to use land, and the needs to actually deal with the contamination, demining, clearing, unexploded ordnance are also U.S. $29.8 billion over 10 years.
So nearly $30 billion just to make the land safe again.
That's the cost. The scale of contamination is vast. It impacts lives, livelihoods, movement, access to farmland. They estimate a U.S. $1.1 billion annual loss in regional tax revenue and U.S. $11.2 billion loss in GDP just because land is contaminated. It's this silent, long-term economic drain on top of everything else.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
What about water and sanitation?
Severely impacted.
Right.
U.S. $4.6 billion damage, U.S. $11.3 billion in needs, millions struggling with basic water access, plus pollution risks.
And schools. Education.
U.S. $13.4 billion damage to education and science facilities. Needs are U.S. $32.9 billion, and that connects directly to an estimated accumulated learning loss for students.
Learning loss.
U.S. $7.8 billion since February 2022, the long-term impact on a generation.
And geographically, the damage is concentrated near the front lines, right? But the economic losses are wider.
Exactly. The physical damage is heaviest in oblasts like Donetsk, Kharkivsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Mykolaiv. But the losses, the economic impacts, ripple across the whole country. Kyiv and the surrounding oblast, for instance, account for 20% of total losses. That map in the report really shows it.
And even cultural heritage hasn't been spared.
Tragically, no. U.S. $4.1 billion in damage, U.S. $10.5 billion in needs, including UNESCO World Heritage Sites now on the list of World Heritage in danger.
It's just comprehensive destruction, touching every single aspect of the country.
It really is.
So given this, this immense scale of damage and need, how is Ukraine even starting to approach recovery? What are the biggest hurdles?
Well, the government of Ukraine is actively working on it. They've set up specific structures for recovery.
Like what?
Things like the Strategic Investment Council, the Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories, and a state agency specifically for infrastructure restoration and development. And they're trying to align reforms with their EU accession goals, which gives a kind of framework for building back better, integrating resilience and sustainability.
They're also developing some kind of management system for projects.
Yeah, a public investment management system, or PIM. They're piloting it now. Think of it as the government's way to prioritize what gets rebuilt first and how funding flows.
So like a master list of projects.
Essentially, yes. They have a single project pipeline. For 2025, they've prioritized 304 specific investment projects that totals nearly U.S. $12 billion, plus 44 non-investment programs worth over U.S. $5 billion.
Okay, they have priorities. But this brings us right back to the money, doesn't it? The challenge.
Right back. Face to face with the biggest challenge. The financing gap.
How big is it?
The total needs for just those 2025 priority projects and programs, over U.S. $17 billion. The financing gap they're facing is U.S. $9.96 billion.
Almost $10 billion short, just for the immediate priorities for 1 year.
Exactly, which is why international support is absolutely crucial.
And there has been significant support, right?
Oh, definitely. The World Bank Group alone mobilized around U.S. $77 billion in financing support between Feb 22 and the end of 24. The EU is providing massive aid, especially through their Ukraine facility that's $50 billion allocated for 2024-2027. The UN supporting millions of people, too.
But the RDNA4 report says, despite this support, there are still major challenges in the recovery process itself.
Yeah, several big ones. That large financing gap, obviously, means they have to mobilize huge amounts of external funding and, really critically, private sector investment.
And getting accurate information must still be hard.
Data limitations persist, yes. Because the invasion is ongoing, assessing damage accurately in areas they can't access is really difficult.
What about that PM system for prioritizing projects? Is it working perfectly?
It's evolving. The report notes the prioritization scores suggest there's still room to improve, making sure projects are fully aligned with strategy and genuinely shovel-ready.
And bringing in private companies.
Vital, but it needs more work. Further reforms, updated frameworks, like for public-private partnerships, where government and businesses team up on big projects.
And importantly, the report also flags those specific needs for vulnerable groups again, right? In the recovery context.
Yes. The huge need for social and affordable housing, services for people with disabilities, older persons, support for veterans. It points out a lack of specific funding allocated in the 2025 non-investment priorities for some key sectors like healthcare, transport, and water, even though the needs there are immense.
So gaps in the planning, potentially.
Or at least areas needing more focus, and there are also specific technical challenges. Mine action, for example, needs better methods, better coordination.
But despite all these hurdles, the focus is still on Build Back Better.
Yes, integrating sustainability, resilience, and also the principle of subsidiarity empowering local governments, who often know local needs best, to play a key role in recovery.
It's clearly just a massive, multifaceted challenge, from the immediate fighting to the decades-long rebuilding.
Absolutely. It's hard to overstate.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We navigated the political commentary, the immediate attacks, and then took that deep dive into the World Bank's RDNA4 report.
And that report, it just lays bare the vast scale of human suffering, the economic damage, the physical destruction, and the truly monumental costs and challenges of recovery for Ukraine.
Understanding this whole situation, it really means looking beyond those daily headlines, doesn't it? To grasp the layered, devastating impacts on people's lives, on infrastructure, the country's future.
It's a stark reminder these aren't just abstract numbers. We're talking homes, schools, hospitals, jobs, the very fabric of communities damaged or destroyed.
And the report shows that even with the conflict ongoing, Ukraine is starting that immense task of planning for recovery, but facing huge challenges, financing gaps, mine action, addressing the specific needs of those hit hardest.
Yeah, the planning is underway amidst the chaos.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider, connecting that physical and human story. The RDNA4 details the staggering physical destruction, that $500 billion price tag for rebuilding infrastructure over a decade. But it also powerfully highlights the deep ongoing human impacts: displacement, poverty, trauma, the specific struggles of veterans, people with disabilities, all these vulnerable groups.
Right, the human cost.
So, given the immense scale of the physical task and these persistent, complex human needs, especially while the conflict is still active, what does recovery truly mean in this context? And how do you even measure success when the very foundations are still being shaken by war every day?
It's a profound question, isn't it? How do you restore not just buildings, but lives, communities, hope, under such incredibly difficult circumstances?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.